SVC Media.
Welcome to the iGaming Daily Podcast, analysing the news from the betting and gaming industry all over the globe, supported by Optimove, the #1 CRM marketing solution for the iGaming market.
Hello everyone, hope we're all doing okay, hope we've had a good weekend, hope the people who went to the SBC Summit Malta have got back safely. I'm Ted Orme-Clay, editor of SBC News, and I'm here with my colleague Viktor, the senior journalist of SBC News, and as always Ted Memmier, the editor-at-large at SBC Media. We've got a couple of quite big developments to talk about here on today's iGaming Daily, sponsored by Optimove. So, late last week, Gibraltar and the UAE were removed from the EU's AML watch list, which should be a pretty positive move for stakeholders in the betting and gaming sectors in both jurisdictions. Gibraltar is, of course, a very big established hub for European gaming, with many bookmakers, casino operators and B2B tech firms registered on the island. And the UAE, on the other hand, is eyeing up an expansion of its local gaming industry, which could see the country become a hub in its own right in the Middle East region, and is something that has got a lot of people paying quite close attention to it. So, yeah, welcome to the episode, and I'm going to have a chat with Ted and Viktor about this. So, Viktor, you broke the story on SBC News last week. Let's just set the stage a bit. What exactly is this AML list that the EU has? Why are countries placed on it? Which countries are currently on it?
So it's pretty self-explanatory from the name. The EU's AML list includes countries that the Union considers to be of significant to hold significant financial threats. So countries that usually are not considered to have enough supervision and enough control over their financial risk assessments. The list is there, namely to protect the EU's financial ecosystem by listing the countries which are of high risk. The goal, I guess you can say, the end goal is to prevent any existing to circumvent existing risks and to prevent new risks from arising. It's also worth noting that the EU's AML risk is tightly connected to the Financial Action Task Force's AML risk. They both are closely aligned together. They both focus on the same issue. Money laundering, terrorist financing risks, and it's sort of the FATF's list sort of takes lead when it comes to which countries are considered a threat and which not, and the EU then closely follows on that list. Once there is a change in the FATF's list, then the EU's AML list gets updated with the same changes pretty soon. And as is the case with Gibraltar and the UAE, they got delisted from the FATF's list, and the EU followed closely by delisting them as well.
Yeah, I think it's very important of you to note that, I think, isn't it, that this list is closely connected to the FATFs, because this is a topic we've discussed before on iGaming Daily. It's something that's been covered on SBC News and on Payment Expert as well, one of our sister sites, that the FATF list often has a lot of implications for betting and gaming, doesn't it? I mean, we saw, obviously, quite notably Malta, funnily enough, given that Ted and I have just returned from there not long ago, was on the AFTF list for around a year, I think, in 2021, wasn't it? And then Malta, very similar to Gibraltar, probably more significantly than Gibraltar, is a very big hub for the European iGaming industry and the online betting industry, both B2C and B2B. So it was quite noticeable that for some time, this leading European hub was on the FATF list, and then the same as has happened to Gibraltar, which has obviously now been removed, as you said, Viktor, and has subsequently been removed from the EU list. So, if you could just build on this a bit more for us, Viktor. why Gibraltar been placed on the list, and what did it do to secure its removal?
Well, to be placed on that list is generally not a good image for you. This means that you're generally lacking enough supervision over your financial ecosystem. There is, like I said, increased risk from money laundering. There's the specific reasons why Gibraltar was listed on the FATF's list. From my research was that it lacked enough. One of the reasons was that it lacked enough supervision, enough action when it comes to seizing assets from criminals who have been indicted and prosecuted, etc. So that was one of the reasons why it was listed. Another reason, which is more topical to us, is that it lacked enough controls over its online gambling market.
Can I just intervene there? Sorry, this is Ted to our audience. It's jumping in. Look, we're going to kind of rewind back to 2022 and when it was placed abruptly on the grey list of the AFTF. Immediately, the gambling commissioner, Andrew Lyman, who's the gambling commissioner of Gibraltar, he believed that the reason why Gibraltar had been placed was mainly due to its court processing of cases involving AML rather than any kind of technicalities directly related to the market or liabilities on licensing. So he said that part of the problem was that, for example, they wanted the AFTF wanted the Gibraltar Gaming Association to have like a great control of the management of the business, who were the kind of the direct controllers of each business that were found to be involved in these AML cases, which Gibraltar just didn't have. It wasn't kind of mandatory to their licensing. And he believed that it was actually more of kind of an update of licensing policies related to gambling rather than like the technicalities of the market that had exposed Gibraltar as liable to kind of AML conditions or AML oversight.
There you go, yeah, and that was when a few years back, 2022.
Yeah, 2022. But he, immediately Gibraltar kind of fought off the charges, and he said that actually much of the same principles that were carried over from Malta were then carried over to Gibraltar.
Yeah, and they quickly took action to fix whatever the criticism was, because they got delisted in 2024, just. 2 years after.
Yeah,
so,
and then I think another exposure there's that it wasn't necessarily to the kind of the main accounts in Gibraltar. It was to do with like secondary businesses and white labels. So again, we're going back to what happened out in the Isle of Man, whereby there's a business that applies a license. And at the time, actually, I think Gibraltar was trying to kind of limit these businesses of, white label ownership and just kind of be more transparent on who owns what. And these companies can come back and say to them, well, look, these are the managers in charge of the business.
I think that's a very interesting point you've raised there, Ted, about the whole topic of the white labels. Like you say, they've been quite significant in the Isle of Man. We've had a lot of scrutiny over them in recent months and recent years. I mean, we reported this on SBC News and iGaming Expert, didn't we, about the TGP Europe fallout and the different licenses and white label agreements that were withdrawn from that. So that's quite an interesting topic that's been raised across these gambling jurisdictions. The Isle of Man government as well has been putting out some statements over the past year or so about its awareness of the heightened risk of money laundering and terrorist financing threats. I think they've mentioned Southeast Asia as being a particularly troubling region, I guess you could say, one of concern. This is something that the United Nations have noted as well, particularly around like crypto casinos and offshore betting operators and anything that these companies might be involved in out there. Yeah, junkets as well. So, yeah, that's a very interesting point to raise. I mean, just to build on that for us, Ted, how significant would you say this development, the removal of Gibraltar from the list, is for the wider international betting and gaming industry?
Yes, it's significant. As you know, Gibraltar is a home to major B2C and B2B gaming firms, and that includes the likes of your Entain, your Evokes, and your Bet Victors. And I think this is more important between the relationship between the governor and top licenses that will want to have that kind of will have that kind of redress of being taken off the AML list. And for Gibraltar to kind of restore its kind of global reputation, I think it is important. However, look, in terms of like, does this ease any kind of compliance pressure off these guys? No. Because I don't think they necessarily answer to Gibraltar. They answer to all the markets in which they're licensed. So it's multi-jurisdictional here, but I think it's a good footing for Gibraltar just to kind of get to a new platform.
Thank you very much, Ted. I think, yeah, I'd agree with you on that point. I think this is definitely more of a significant development for the regulators and the government in Gibraltar, more so than it is the businesses based there, just because, yeah, the government will see this as a good endorsement of its reputation and its standing as somewhere to do business, somewhere to invest.
Yeah, and you got to remember that it's essentially de-risking of the whole market in Gibraltar. This means that companies based there will have eased access to EU markets just because of all the removal of all the red tape, administrative red tape when it comes to being on the FATF's list, because it involves telling banks to be careful when doing business with companies from the certain jurisdiction. So it's definitely a major positive for the businesses stationed there.
In that case as well, I mean, there was some stuff that was talked about last week at the SBC summit where some people were noting that some banks are often reluctant to work with certain gaming firms. So again, like you say there, Victor, the reputational element of this is quite important. Right, we're going to take a quick break and then we'll be back to talk about the UAE's potential as a gaming sector and its removal from the EU's list as well. So stay tuned.
SBC Leaders connects the gambling industry's top-tier operators and associations to share the best ideas, collaborate on solving the biggest issues, and push innovation throughout the betting and gaming industry. If you're an operator and want to join the discussion, visit sbcleaders.com for more information.
Welcome back to iGaming Daily, sponsored by Optimove. I'm Ted Clay, I'm here with Viktor Kayed and Ted Memmier, and we're going to move on from the topic we were just talking about in the first half of this episode, which was Gibraltar, to the UAE, which is the other jurisdiction that was removed from the EU's AML list recently. So, Victor, again, let's sort of set the stage of this one. Why was the UAE, included on the EU's AML list? There's too many abbreviations here. And why was it removed? Is it for pretty similar reasons?
Similar reason. This framework remains the same, and the criteria that you get listed on the FATF. So similar reasons: weak AML controls, insufficient supervisory of the local markets. Another thing here that is quite intrinsic to the UAE is that it is a high value market just because of its nature. So high value usually brings also high risk. So this is the only specific quality of this market. But other than that, all the other reasons were generally the same.
And I mean, yeah, the UAE is, of course, a huge hub for international business. There's so many different developments and projects going on there. And I think, this links back to what we were talking about with Gibraltar, isn't it? That a lot of this is about reputation and about your appeal to investors, your appeal to businesses. And the UAE is going through an interesting phase at the moment where it's starting to experiment with an expansion of its gaming industry. The country, of course, is a big tourist destination, has a lot of visitors coming through every year, often for commercial reasons, and they're starting to eye up the idea of gaming playing a bit of a bigger role in this, aren't they? I mean, we've seen like Wynn resorts have they've got a resort there, haven't they, I think. So, I mean, Ted, is this something you've been following much lately, like the UAE's prospects as a gaming hub in the Middle East?
Look, where this stands is the UAE is laying the groundwork for a legalised and regulated gaming industry. Its vision kind of took off in 2023 when it launched the General Commercial Gaming Regulatory Authority that is led by ex-MGM Chief Executive Jim Moran, in who he is actively kind of leading the efforts in terms of licensing and setting up kind of the terms of play of the market. There's still kind of no formal kind of agenda or timetable as to when the UAE will applied its gaming framework and how it will apply it, because you got to remember that this has to carry across 6 domains. As stands, they're looking to launch the first project, which is the Wynn Resorts at the Ras Al Khaimah Resort, and that would be the first kind of legal casino project in the Gulf. It's a big project. It carries massive ambitions. But I think from everyone I've spoken to, it's likely to kind of change in direction at any point.
I mean, would you say that? So I'm just going to again reference some stuff that we talked about at the SBC Summit Malta last week, and that's that some people are kind of predicting that the way the UAE is going to progress is that it might end up issuing a license for companies that could function in a similar way to like Malta licenses are used, where companies will hold them and operate internationally. So do you reckon we're seeing some parallels here, Ted, between how the UAE is developing, or is potentially developing, I guess we should say, with how Malta and Gibraltar themselves have kind of emerged and set themselves up in Europe?
Okay, I'm going to put my notes away on this. Look, there's a lot of easy chat there where they kind of believe that the UAE could be the gateway to open up the Asian market for online gaming operators. Now, the majority of Asian jurisdictions, for cultural and economic reasons, have remained kind of in the grey area in terms of regulated online gambling games. Not all of them, but especially with kind of sports betting and online slots. I really don't think that the UAE, just if they sought to become a hub for iGaming, I don't think that it will be applicable to kind of larger markets of like your Chinas and your Indias and your Japans or South Korea. I think at the end of the day that those are markets with their own statutes, that they will consider kind of their internal factors for launching an online gambling regime and whether they choose to. But however, look, I think that the UAE, you simply have to view from its own kind of standpoint that, as Viktor said, it's a very, very rich market. And again, it's going to carry that kind of interest. It should just carry that interest in that kind of standalone place. Like, I don't think you have to dream that it can do more than it can. You should just take it for what it is, really.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting point you raised there, Ted, about the prospects of betting and gaming sort of across Asia. Like you say, the continent has got some far more political and cultural and economic intricacies than Europe does. If we're just going to make a sort of broad comparison, that I think makes the prospect of the UAE being like a hub for the wider region a bit more complicated, right?
But where I think the UAE could have a huge impact, I think it would be kind of in the funding and kind of the enterprise of iGaming, especially for games and technology. So I think that could become like the Asia hub there. And especially these are countries that are kind of trying to diversify from kind of petroleum-based economies, and I think they kind of view kind of iGaming and go, well, okay, if we can become a hub for developing games or developing kind of software solutions and platforms for Asian consumers, I think that's a big take for them. But on the regulatory front, I don't think it's a play.
So on this topic of funding and investment, then, Viktor, just to close us off, do you reckon this removal from these grey lists will be significant to any goals that the UAE might have in this area?
Well, it would remove the risk. It would generally make the UAE better looking in the eyes of the international market, in the eyes of investors, like we just discussed. Not being associated with these lists is generally considered a good thing. I don't think there's any negatives from it. It would also it also signifies that the UAE is actively engaging with international regulators like the EU and the FATF, which additionally boosts its credibility as a market, regardless whether it's going to target the local consumer. So like Ted said, is it just going to behave as a hub for as a production hub for these games, which we've already seen early movers in that direction. Recently, I think Scientific Games acquired a license lottery to provide lottery technology in the UAE. So we've already seen. I think Ted kind of predicted the way the market might go. We're going to see in the coming years, but I think it's definitely a good development overall, and it adds another layer of financial security to an otherwise very attractive investor destination.
Great stuff. Thank you, Viktor. I think that is all the time we've got for today. Obviously, quite a few complicated, intricate developments we talked about here, and we'll keep these covered on SBC News, and I'm sure our colleagues on iGaming Expert and Payment Expert will do the same as well. So thanks very much, Ted and Viktor, for joining me on this, and thanks to all our listeners for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you for listening to today's iGaming Daily podcast, supported by Optimove, the #1 CRM marketing solution for the iGaming market. If you want to find out more about some of the subjects raised today, feel free to explore any of the sites in the SBC News network, or check out the latest edition of the SBC Leaders magazine. Happy reading.